I'm Aryeh Schwartz, and welcome to the Winsidr Show, where it's all about the W. Aces in the house. We're not talking about the Aces. We're talking about your local team, the New York Liberty, a super team with all the eyes, all the pressure to return to the finals. It's a fun one. I'm excited to dive in on this one. Welcome back to the show. Ace, the Liberty. Ace is the Liberty. It fits quite perfectly. It fits quite nicely. First of all, you've had to deal with me for recording days 2 in a row. How you doing?
Good. Excited to now talk about the Liberty, which, is my hometown team. But still also have concerns like I do, or I did for the Mercury. So excited to talk about it. Yeah.
Well, I don't know why I'm thinking about tennis, but I'll tennis serve it over to you. Give me a brief recap, a summary of, in case anybody lived under a rock and has no idea why we're talking about the Liberty. Tell me.
Well, last season they really just, what's the term in gambling? Pushed all their chips in. There we go.
We're clearly both gamblers.
Yeah. They pushed all their chips in order to just turn into instant contenders. And so they signed Brianna Stewart. They signed Jonquel Jones, or they traded for Jonquel Jones. They still have Sabrina Ionescu. They also signed Courtney Vandersloot and did some really interesting things, I would say, with their bench. And then they also still had Maureen Johannes coming off the bench for them as well. So on paper, they had a really strong, well-rounded team offensively. Defensively, last season left some to be desired in the first half of the season. Second half, it looked like they actually figured it out. In the postseason, they did start to stutter a little bit when it came to defense, but they made it all the way to the finals and hit like a total brick wall by the name of the Las Vegas Aces, and also by the name of Brianna Stewart just falling into a slump at probably the worst possible time for the Liberty. And so it looks like this season they're just trying to run it back, trying to form some sort of team chemistry with one another, while also drafting some really interesting players this year, players that I think all work really well with this team's bench, especially with Maureen Johannes gone this season. And so, they're still going to be very fun. They're still going to be, I think, a high scoring team. My concerns just lie with defensively, the starters. How are they going to pick up that energy and that intensity? And also just concerns with, all right, you wanted to retain a very similar roster to last season going into this season. Does that work for you as you try to compete with teams that really improved, like the Seattle Storm and the Las Vegas Aces, or teams like the Connecticut Sun, who are always in the mix? They're always going to be a threat to them. So, great. Not perfect, but great.
You broke it down perfectly. Maybe that, whatever wasn't perfect, but you broke it down perfectly. Last year was super interesting and exciting because, it was roller coaster if you're a Liberty fan, right? There was high highs, low lows. And I think in the finals, the two things that we kind of spoke about throughout the season last year as the question marks, defense, specifically guard defense. How are they going to stop the Las Vegas Aces, who are such a high octane guard offense? And then also the depth in the paint. Now, it's a ridiculous statement to be made if we're talking about the clear second best team in the league to say we're talking about their biggest issues are guard defense and post play. And post play isn't even like I'm throwing shade. It's just I'm talking about the fact that JJ likes to get out of the post, and she has that ability. She has that aspect of her game. So does Brianna Stewart. They no longer, in a moment we'll get to this, they don't have Dolson anymore. So those are the questions going into that. And we'll touch on this in a moment, but I don't think necessarily they answered the questions that I have. Make sure you check out on our show notes, sponsor and affiliate links for WNBA merch and WNBA betting. We just started working with some online sports books, so definitely check that out. If you have a gambling problem, please get help. Use the phone number in the show notes. So let me just run through kind of like the big names no longer with this team from the 2023 who they got. They lost Steph Dolson, Jocelyn Willoughby, the fan favorite, Han, no longer with the team, at least this year, and Marine Johannes. And to me, like, when I see that, Willoughby utility player, right? Dolson and Han, size and depth at the big, one of our question marks, always come back. And then Marine, not only, I'm not even going to focus her on defensively. Losing Marine to me adds a new question mark, because no one's going to doubt, Sabrina's ability to score. No one's going to doubt Stewie's or John Quell's. Benajelani at times is going to be, a microwave. But they need, when you're going up against the Aces, the way to beat the Aces is to survive their onslaught of threes. There's many ways, because there's a reason they won 2 championships. But you need to be able to survive the onslaught of threes. You need to either be able to beat the Aces. And I don't want this episode to be about the Aces, but if New York's trying to win a championship, they have to beat the other best team. To beat the Aces, you need the ability to either defensively stop them from making their threes, which not many teams have been able to do, or to match their threes. Everyone goes on hot streaks. Everyone goes on cold streaks. So for me, the Marine loss is a huge, huge one, because, also just like the highlight reels. As a fan of basketball, like the highlight reels, that just sucks. We're not going to have that. They got possibly, arguably, and I think this is going to be a low-key big ad, Kennedy Burke. If she can stay healthy this year, we've seen spurts throughout her career. I think that's going to be a good one. You want to run down, watch me pass off the hard names to you. You want to run down the other people they've added. They got Marquisha Davis, Jalen Sherrod, Ivana Dojic, Liani Fibic. I feel like I always mess up their names, so I apologize. I'm trying my best. I like the additions, and I've talked to some people, I chatted with Miles, chatting with you, chatting with some other people. I'm curious your take on kind of the state of the team, because as you said, they kind of put their chips all in on continuity, on running it back. And my concern is the only player on this roster, key player on this roster, beside that really, truly, I guess, Sabali, you could argue, gains from time, is Sabrina. Stewie's getting older. Sloot is getting older. JJ is getting old. So, like, I don't know. That's kind of where my mind's at of the counter proposal to running it back. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think that's what made this draft really interesting for New York, because they actually, in my opinion, had one of the best draft nights of any of the teams this season. Aside from Marquisha Davis, who I think is going to end up being one of their more versatile scorers. She's also a great defender, so that's one. They also drafted Jessica Carter, who's still on the team. She's a big that I think, if she's able to make the roster, she would make a really big impact in terms of being able to back up Jonquel Jones really well. Then they also got Jalen Sherrod, and she was undrafted, and they were able to sign her to a training camp contract. I really hope they retain her, because in terms of, you're talking about guard defense, she might be their best guard defender on the roster. And so I think those players are going to make a really big impact, at least off the bench for the team. Leonie Fibic, and again, I apologize if I'm butchering her name. She is going to be a really interesting piece for them, because in my mind, she's coming in to replace that microwave scoring that Marine Johannes contributed to the team. She can shoot the three really well. She can get to the cup. I'm not sure defensively how well she has been this year, but I know at least on offense, she is that type of scorer where it's like she could be a really good second or third option for the team if she's like mixed in with the starters. But yeah, when you look at the starters, nothing has changed. And so, not to say that that's a concern, because obviously you have last year's league MVP. You have Benajelani, who seems to just keep getting better. You have Sabrina, who's always going to be able to hit a tough shot. Not always, but most of the time, she'll be able to hit a tough shot.
Just not
You
last
have,
year.
yeah, just not last year, sadly. You have Courtney Vandersloot, who is, your go-to floor general, and she's very trusted. And you have JJ, who again is a former MVP, who had the Liberty been able to pull out a championship last year, she would have been the runaway finals MVP for the team. And so it's like, I hate to say the starters are the concern over the bench, but at this point, I'm like looking at it and I'm looking at the roster and I'm like, yeah, they really did a good job of like making sure they at least have depth to answer for a team like the Aces, who I believe are probably going to be running a shorter rotation throughout the postseason and probably will run a shorter rotation in the finals. The Liberty now have a bench that could maybe step in if Sandy Brondello trusts them enough
that's
to
the other question, right?
step in to stop them on a few possessions. But yeah, I mean, it's like I like that they did that, and I like that they now have that depth. Hopefully they retain that depth. And, it's sad that they do have to make some cuts, because I feel like everyone that they currently have contributes in some way or can contribute. But yeah, my concern just lies with, like you said, like the age factor, and also just, can they keep up with a team like the Aces or the Storm, who are going to be very easily running them off the court at times. So yeah, I mean,
those are fair points.
Yeah, I like what they did.
But
I just don't know if it's enough. Right,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
It, like, what they did is objectively great. I just don't know. Like, I have to see the on-court product for like an extended period of time to be like, okay, yeah, this worked. Like,
well,
awesome.
Also, I mean, if you just look at like, they went to the grocery store, what were their options during free agency, right? Like, I agree. I like what they did, looking overseas to find some other hidden gems, some hidden talents that gets you a player who might have overseas professional experience at a lower price point. Smart move. Get it. Side note, just going to throw this out there because it popped in my head while we were talking. Player who I think might be a great addition to this team at some point during the season as things progress. Sadly, hardships are expected, injuries are expected, and also the price point. A lot of people don't understand this. I'm not going to bore them with all the details, but the price point as the season goes on, let's say a team doesn't have enough money to sign someone for full season. 5 couple games, however many games into the season, that full season contract for a player drops because they're playing less games. So then all of a sudden you have teams who are playing with 11 and didn't have enough to have 12 players on roster can now have 12. So we're going to see some movement once the season gets moving. And Shea Petty, a vet who can shoot, a vet who has versatility, can play defense, is trustworthy, and is a hunger for a championship. So I think she's somebody who I'm looking at, not necessarily like, oh, I'm putting my money down, all chips in because we're big bettors. But just somebody who, like, if I'm Kolb, if I'm the Liberty GM, I'm thinking to myself, okay, let's keep a flyer on her and see how things go as the season progresses. As you talked about, kind of the thing that I touched on it before, but I just want to like reiterate it. JJ, Stewie, and Sabally, those are the bigs. Those are the bigs. That's who you got. But I will say on the positive end, as I've been doing a lot of these episodes, and I was saying to you before we recorded, this team actually has depth. And you said that too. And I agree with you. And I'm not even going to get into the younger or the draft players. I'm just going to talk Caleb Thornton, Kennedy Burke. There, 6 and 7. That's already having 7 players that are vets, trustworthy. Even if you have a Courtney Vandersloot, who maybe someone's going to argue is similar to a Taurasi who's not playing the whole season, you're going to need to sub them out. And they're maybe only a quarter or a half or 3/4 of a starter. But having that depth of 2 extra players, I think is really good. And yeah, I think you touched on this also, like likely this team's going to carry 11 just money wise. But then it comes down to Davis versus Sherrod. And I think, a lot of reasons we could go back and forth on who they're going to take. A wise person always tells me that you're less likely to cut someone that you drafted versus cut someone that you didn't draft. Because otherwise one looks like a mistake. One looks like you're really smart. So yeah, that's my my 2 cents. I'm curious for you. Do you think their style of play will get the continuity will raise them, or because this is an aspect that I didn't even think about till now. We have the continuity, but then you add in these new other players. You know what I mean? Like there's such a twist in who's on the bench, whereas the starters are all the same, but the bench is completely new. How do you think? I guess like what's your take on continuity if the bench changes?
That's such a good question.
It's such a random question too that I've never even thought of before.
Yeah, no, I mean it's true. Like, I mean, and I'm sorry, I'd like to keep going back to the Aces. It is very difficult to talk about the Liberty without mentioning, obviously, the other team that was in the finals with them last year and what they did. But I mean, the Aces are in a similar boat, right? Their bench is going to look very different. I think that they have still the best odds of winning the championship this season, having gone back to back. But they're doing the same thing, right? They're relying on the continuity that their starters have, in addition to being able to incorporate the new additions that they made over the summer and through the draft. Which, again, I do not know how Deja Fair, Kate Martin, and Liz Kitley all fell to them. Like that's actually absurd to me, but it's incredible. But that all being said, like they have a pretty new bench. They can still rely on Alicia Clark as the sixth person off the bench as well. But they have that continuity 1 through 6. Same as the Liberty for the most part because KT is coming back. And so they have that same continuity 1 through 6. So, I mean, I think it helps. Continuity is always going to help because team chemistry isn't easy. That's not something that happens overnight. And this is a team that was only basically formulated and assembled last year, like 90% of the team. So, you know, outside of Sab and Benija, and a few other players that were with the team prior, like they're the only ones that have been around this entire time. And so, yeah, continuity is hugely important. The Connecticut Sun, I think, would also argue that as well. But with the Liberty specifically, like the continuity is great, but I think now this year is a time to figure out, okay, do your play styles all mesh well together though? The way that you guys want to operate this offense together, who's going to get the ball late in the game? Who are we going to rely on? I don't think they had that figured out last year in the postseason, especially because we saw Courtney Vandersloot taking the last shot in that elimination game. That doesn't seem like a logical choice. And that's no disrespect to Courtney Vandersloot. That's just from a perspective of who's scoring.
Stats
that ball, that ball has to go to JJ in that situation. And so I think figuring that out is going to be very important. So yeah, I think the continuity is going to come into play, especially in those late game scenarios. And I think if it's showing that they have figured that out, that's when I would genuinely be like, all right, they took a leap. Like now they're scary. Now this is a scary team to deal with.
I'm curious for your take. When I think of the Liberty and the Aces, right? Like I obviously think starting 5, they're very, very close. They can battle it out. It was, you know, I had my hot take. Weren't going to see them in the finals. I was wrong. Cool. Moving on. When I'm wrong, we move on. No, but it's funny because they won. The Aces win a championship, right? And they do it in such a fashion where they don't use the bench. And then the second year comes around, and going into the year, I'm sitting here and I'm like, what are the odds that they can stay healthy to survive another season, right? 2 in a row, healthy seasons with such a starting heavy play role. And it worked, right? But now we're sitting here, we're like, okay, what are the odds that they can do this for a third season? and the only reason I'm bringing up the Aces in that regard is because I'm thinking about it and I'm like, why am I more worried about the Liberty's health of Sloot, Stewie, and JJ versus the health? And I'll even include Sabrina in that. I'm less worried about Sabrina because she's young and spry and has all the energy in the world. But like, why am I not more concerned about Chelsea Gray, Asia Wilson? I guess Asia Wilson's young and spry and, you know, all the energy in the world. But like, am I crazy for being more concerned about the health of a team of New York where like, I don't know. I just had that thought and I'm curious your take.
I don't think it's that big of a concern. Like, especially because I don't think that, well, first with the Aces, like when you think about it, I mean, they won that elimination game with like 2 of their starters down.
Yeah.
Like, like they started Sydney Colson in that game. Like it was that, I think, was a good showing of the fact like it does not matter.
Like didn't even Kayla George get a start in that?
Yeah. And she was very impactful. Like they showed that they do not need to be 100% healthy because they can rely on their starters or their bench to get it done. If they don't have it on one end of the floor, they will contribute in other ways.
So how does Sandy get New York to that level?
They have to buy in. I mean, I think that last season, it sort of showed, especially in that elimination game, that like without one of JJ, Stewie, or Sabrina being able to like fully take over a game, they were unable to keep up with just the even attack that the Aces had against them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not good. Like they can't win that way. And I think they just have to buy into a system of selflessness. They have to buy into it. And they were like top in the league in assists during the regular season. But I think just in that finals game, the Aces like defense was just such a pressure on them that they were just trying to find anything in any of their individual stars, and it just was not working out.
Remind me, did the Liberty have a hot start, or I feel like they had like a really bad start and then caught up, or they had a really good start and then went bad? I forget.
I feel like they had a bad start in like all of them.
Well, no, because the crazy thought I was gonna have is like when you can fake buying in, and when things start working, it works, right?
Yeah,
you're selling it, you're method acting to an effect. But then when push comes to shove, toes to the fire, that's where it's like, are you actually bought in? And hearing this from coaches and people who have actually played and are much more smart basketball knowledge, people to me always tell me, so don't shoot the messenger. They always tell me that the buy-in starts in camp. And you see it early in the season, and often it's circular. So if your season starts off and you're having those struggles and you're not buying in, often when the end of the season comes around, you revert down to that. There's some movie I'm blanking on now, and it's probably a horrible movie that I shouldn't reference, but there's some sports movie. It's Will Ferrell's basketball movie, Semi-Pro, where they figure out a play and they're like, we're going to practice this play until we throw up. And then at the end of the season, it comes to, and that's kind of how I envision it, because I'm a visual guy, where New York had that full circle moment of they struggled early on and they found, that, I don't want to say fake, like faking isn't the right word. You buy into it. When you don't have that true base, it all crumbles eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, if anyone that was watching the finals last year, they might have found something in relying on JJ as the base. And I think that was a great base for them to rely on. But then for her to be kind of like alone on an island for most of that series, and then to struggle in that elimination game and not have anyone else to go to, that was the killer. I mean, it was just the fact that no one had anything going other than her. And the team was sort of like, all right, well, then let's just feed her. And then when she can't hit anything because the Aces defense is locking in on her, we're not going to hit anything either. And that just ended up being the downfall of them in that series. So, I mean, and this is the thing with the Liberty, right? Like they obviously were just cold a lot of the times in that series too. They weren't playing in the style that got them to that point in the first place, which is to say selfless. And so everyone was just out of rhythm. And that's something that they could fix and then, work on throughout the season and end up going back to the finals and maybe learning from that mistake, which I think that they would. But yeah, I mean, it's just a wait and see. it really is a wait and see with them this season.
I'm just going to throw out there, because I've talked to Rachel about this a lot and we agree on something. So I'm just going to throw it out there.
Yeah.
They need a dog. They need somebody who's going to be that, like, just that dog who's going to will them. And I'm not talking about necessarily will them by making, a 25-point game or a 30-point game or whatever, but someone who's just going to be that vocal, aggressive alpha who, and I think sometimes when you have this is a weird statement, but sometimes when you have nice alphas, it kind of becomes like a pass. And they need someone who's going to step up and be like, no, JJ, you're shooting that. No, Sabrina, you're shooting that right now. Don't give that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, a fun part: hopes, dreams, expectations for the season for New York Liberty.
I just want them to have fun this season. I feel like last season had so much pressure, or it came with so much pressure and so much expectations on the team. Obviously, this like super team narrative was floating around literally the entire season, despite both teams saying they hated the label. But I just think that the pressure was a lot. And I feel like the entire season was kind of like all right, let's like, what's the word? Let's just like fast forward through this regular season and get to what we all know is going to happen, which is these two teams in the finals. This season, I just want them to find an identity. I want them to, like you just said, find that dog or dogs on the team who are going to be able to will them to tough fought victories, ideally, and just be able to thrive under like one system as opposed to all of them trying to do something different. Yeah, I think that'll be the keys for them. It's just really like fully embracing one identity and playing into that throughout the season and just letting that grow.
I just want to piggyback off that and just say I really like that comment about the pressure, because it seems, now obviously I'm very far away, but it seems like the pressure has been lifted almost. Now you got Seattle, Phoenix, Vegas, New York, argue Atlanta, Connecticut. Like, there's so many more teams now. It doesn't seem like the focal point, and we can't ignore Leah Boston, Alyssa Smith, Caitlin Clark. But now, yeah, it just very much seems like, okay, it's no longer just Vegas, New York. It's no longer all of our media coverage is going to be New York and how they're a super team, and are they going to be able to take out the other super team and this, and that, which you got to think is positive. Like, my wife always reminds me, because she's a therapist, that like a lot of these players have the skill to do it, but it's the mental. And so when you don't have whatever that big mental thing looming on you, you can play to your full potential and you can be more comfortable, more relaxed. And like you're saying, play the style of basketball and play comfortably. Love it. Love it. Well, as you know, I like to end every episode with a simple question. Who's your GOAT? Are you sticking or are you changing? I don't know.
Yeah, I'll stick with Candace Parker. Yeah, I feel like that's like the timely answer, obviously, with her retirement. I will say, and I didn't say this yesterday, but I really hope that they do like some sort of like, not retirement tour, because like she retired before she could like play out her last season. I guess we didn't know it was her last season last year. But I hope they do something, especially during like All-Star weekend or something. Yeah. Like they have to. But LA, I already started seeing the little like commercials and stuff during the WNBA League Pass game break things that they're always like repeating the same one over and over again. And there's like
they really just want to hammer it home.
They hammer a lot of things home on those game breaks. But yeah, no, I will stick with Candace Parker, definitely.